A dark silhouette cuts through the morning mist, a Viking longship gliding toward a sleeping shore. We often picture these Norsemen as bold explorers and fierce warriors, a romantic image celebrated in stories. But history holds a far darker truth about their raids, one that specifically targeted women with a fate so grim it was often considered worse than death. By the end of this, you will understand the brutal reality behind the legend, a story of survival that redefines our understanding of the Viking Age. What was the true value of a human life in their world, and what unimaginable choices did captives face in a foreign land? What does it truly mean when death is not the worst outcome? The world dissolved into a nightmare of smoke and screams. One moment, a woman might be tending a hearth or a garden, the life she knew solid and predictable. The next, chaos erupted as warriors stormed the shore. There was no time for goodbyes, no chance for a final embrace. In the brutal calculus of a raid, able-bodied women were valuable plunder, seized with the same ruthless efficiency as silver or cattle. They were violently torn from their husbands, their children, their parents, their world ending in an instant. The journey that followed was a different kind of terror. Packed into the sleek longships, these captives faced the open sea. They were exposed to wind and freezing spray, crammed together in a space designed for speed, not comfort. Every oar stroke carried them further from everything they had ever known into a future of complete uncertainty. The captors were not gentle, and the threat of violence was a constant, chilling presence. This voyage across the cold, gray waters was not just a physical trial. It was the start of a profound psychological breaking, a forced severing from identity and homeland. Maps tracing the common raiding routes from Norway and Denmark to the coasts of England, Ireland, and France illustrate just how far these women were taken. Imagine seeing your home vanish over the horizon, replaced by the vast, empty ocean, knowing you were being shipped like cargo to a foreign land where no one spoke your language or knew your name. For many, the longship was not merely a vessel. It was a floating prison that delivered them into a lifetime of subjugation. Arrival in a foreign port did not bring freedom. It merely exchanged the terror of the sea for the grim reality of the marketplace. These women, now stripped of their names and pasts, were classified under a single, brutal term, thralls. In the Viking world, a thrall was not a person but property, no different from an axe or a cow in the eyes of the law. They possessed no rights, could not own anything, and their lives were entirely subject to the will of their masters. This was the fate that awaited the majority of those captured on distant shores, a life in chains where death was denied, but personhood was erased. The labor demanded of them was relentless and backbreaking, a dawn-to-dusk cycle of toil designed to break the spirit as much as it sustained the household. A thrall might be forced to work the fields under a sky that was no longer her own, her hands calloused from tilling soil that would never belong to her family. Others faced the endless, grinding rhythm of turning grain into flour, a monotonous task that wore down the body and soul. Inside the longhouse, her duties were just as ceaseless, cooking over smoky fires, weaving cloth for her captors, and tending to children she did not bear. This was not simply work, it was a systematic erasure of the life she once lived. Her skills and strength now harnessed for the benefit of those who had destroyed her old world. Beyond the exhaustion was a constant state of vulnerability. A thrall lived at the absolute mercy of their owner, with no legal recourse against punishment or mistreatment. Their bodies were not their own, subject to physical discipline or worse, a pervasive threat that shadowed every moment of their existence. The food was often scant, their sleeping quarters little more than a drafty corner of the barn or a space by the hearth. Every day was a struggle for survival in a world that had legally defined them as less than human. How does a person endure when their very identity is stripped away, when the memory of a home and a name becomes a secret, painful burden? This was the true cost of survival, a fate many considered far more cruel than a warrior's quick end. For some women, the marketplace led to a fate even more intimate and complex. They were not sent to the fields or the grindstone, but chosen to become concubines. This term might suggest a relationship, but in the Viking world, it was a distinct form of bondage. A woman taken as a concubine had no agency, no power to refuse the man who now owned her. Her body and her life were entirely under his control, a reality that defies any romantic notions of these arrangements. Her primary purpose was often to produce children, sons and daughters who would become part of the household, adding to the master's wealth and status. Yet her own position remained painfully insecure. She was not a wife with legal standing or social respect. She existed in a shadowy space, bearing children for a family that was never truly her own. Imagine the profound emotional conflict of carrying a child, a bond of life and love, within a circumstance born of violence and captivity. Her children, while free and not considered thralls, occupied a lower rung in the social hierarchy, their status forever marked by their mother's origins. They were a part of the family, yet always a reminder of its conquests. The psychological toll of this existence is almost beyond comprehension. This was a woman forced into the most intimate proximity with the very men who may have been responsible for the destruction of her village, the death of her brothers, or the enslavement of her parents. She had to navigate daily life within the household of her captors, surrounded by a foreign language, alien customs, and the constant, humiliating reminder of her powerlessness. Her survival depended on the whims of the man who owned her, a state of perpetual dependence that eroded her sense of self. This was not a life of privilege, but a different kind of prison, one where the walls were made of social obligation and the chains were forged in the bedchamber. How does a person reconcile such devastating contradictions, living a life where the source of their deepest trauma is also the source of their only means of survival? This marketplace was a world of noise and cruel evaluation. Far from the quiet fields or smoky longhouses, the fate of these women was decided in the bustling, ruthless slave markets of Viking trade hubs. Ports like Dublin, Hedeby, and Kiev thrived on this human commerce, a trade so vital it formed the very backbone of the Norse economy. Silver and spices flowed in one direction, and people flowed in the other, reduced to items in a ledger. Here, the captured were paraded before potential buyers, their humanity stripped away in a public spectacle of appraisal. They were inspected with a cold, practical eye, their age, health, and physical condition assessed just like livestock at an auction. A young, strong woman might fetch a higher price, valued for a lifetime of labor, while others were deemed suitable for different, more specific roles. The air was thick with foreign languages and the clinking of scales, a jarring contrast to the silent horror experienced by those on the block. This was the moment of their ultimate commodification, a final, public severing from the person they once were. With the fall of a hammer, their future was sealed, but its direction was a terrifying mystery. A woman could be sold to a local farmer, destined for a life of toil in a nearby fjord. Or she could be purchased by a merchant looking to transport her much further, embarking on another harrowing journey to the wealthy markets of the East. Her final destination might be the grand city of Constantinople, the heart of the Byzantine Empire, or even deeper into the realms of the Islamic Caliphate. Each of these places represented a different kind of oblivion, a new set of customs and languages to navigate, all under the unyielding yoke of servitude. This sale was the point of no return, a transaction that shattered the last remaining threads connecting her to her family, her culture, and any hope of return. One moment on the auction block could mean being taken to a land so distant and strange. The shores of her homeland became not just a memory, but a geographical impossibility. Death in a raid offered a warrior's clean end, but survival promised a different kind of ordeal. The choice was not between life and death, but between an end and an existence. For the women taken, that existence was meticulously dismantled, reshaped into property. It began with the violent rupture from home, continued through the dehumanizing voyage, and was finalized in the bustling slave markets. Their lives were then spent in relentless labor, their bodies subjected to the will of their owners, and their very identities erased under the label of thrall. This was not a single moment of horror, but a prolonged state of being, a life sentence where every sunrise meant another day of servitude. The archaeological record speaks volumes, not with grand swords, but with the cold, heavy iron of slave chains and collars, artifacts that whisper of the countless lives commodified. Historical accounts, from sagas to the chronicles of terrified monks, all point to this same brutal reality. The romanticized Viking explorer stands upon a foundation built by these invisible hands. So we are left with a difficult question. How does this darker, more complex truth reshape your understanding of the Viking Age? Does it change how you see their legacy of exploration and trade when you consider the human cost that made it possible? Share your reflections in the comments below. And if you want to continue uncovering history's hidden stories, subscribe for more journeys into the past.